Hey guys, Mr. Hart here for Chapter 8 of Lord of the Flies. This chapter is called The Gift for Darkness. Piggy looked up miserably from the pond-pale beach to the dark mountain. Are you sure? Really sure, I told you a dozen times. We saw it. Do you think we're safe down here? How the hell should I know? Ralph jerked him away from him and watched a few paces along the beach. Jack was kneeling and drawing a circular pattern in the sand with his forefinger, and Piggy's voice came to them, hushed. Are you ready? Are you sure? Really? Go up and see. And Jack said contemptuously, and then good riddance to you. You have no fear? The beast had teeth, said Ralph, and it had big black eyes. He shuddered violently, and Piggy took off his round of glass and polished the surface. What are we going to do? Ralph turned towards the platform. The conch glimmered from the trees, a white knob against the place where the sun would rise. He pushed back his mop. I don't know. He seemed to panic the flight down the mountainside. He remembered the panic flight down the mountainside. I don't think we'd ever fight a thing that size, honestly, We'd talk about it, but we wouldn't actually fight a tiger. I think we'd just hide. Even Jack, you would hide, wouldn't you? Jack was still looking at the sand. What about my hunters? Simon came stealing out of the shadows by the shelter. Ralph ignored Jack's question. He pointed to the touch of the yellow above the sea. As long as there's light, we're brave enough, but then... And now this thing squats by the fire as though it didn't want us to be rescued. He was twisting his hands now unconsciously. His voice rose. So we can't have a signal fire. We're beaten. A point of gold appeared above the sea, and all at once the light scattered. The skies lightened. Sorry, guys. What about my hunters? You mean boys armed with sticks? That's what's going to beat this? Jack got to his feet. His face was red as he marched away. Piggy put on his one glass and looked at Ralph. Now you've done it, you've been rude about his hunters. Oh, shut up, Piggy. The sound of the inexplicably brown conch interrupted them. As though he was serenading the rising sun, Jack went on blowing it until the shelters were astir and the hunters crept from the platform and the little ones whimpered as now they so frequently did. Ralph rose obediently and then they went to the platform. Talk, said Ralph bitterly. Talk, talk, talk. He took the conch from Jack. This meeting, Jack interrupted him. I'm the one who called it. Yeah, well, if you hadn't called it, I should have. You just blew the conch. Well, isn't that what calling it is? Oh, fine, take it. Go on, talk. Ralph thrust the conch into Jack's arm and he sat down on the trunk. I'm calling the assembly because of a lot of things. First, you know now that we've seen the beast. We crawled up. We're only a few feet away. The beast sat up and it looked at us. I don't know what it does. We don't even know what it is. The beast comes from the sea? Out of the dark. Trees? Quiet! Now you listen, Jack said. The beast is sitting up there, whatever it is. Perhaps it's waiting. Hunting! Yes, hunting! Hunting! Said Jack. He remembered his age-old tremors in the forest. Yes, the beast is a hunter. Only... Now shut up now! Let me speak. The next thing is that we couldn't kill it. And the next thing is that Ralph said my hunters are no good. Wait a minute, I never said that, Ralph chimed in. I've got the conch. Ralph, he thinks you're cowards, my hunters, running away from the boar and the beast. And that's not all he said. There was a kind of sigh on the platform as if everyone knew what was coming. Jack's voice went up, tremulous yet determined, pushing against the uncooperative silence. He's like Piggy. He says things like Piggy. He isn't a proper chief. Jack clutched the conch to himself. He's a coward himself. For a moment he paused and then went on. And on top of that, when Roger and me went on, he stayed back because he is a coward. I went too! After we already did. The two boys glared at each other through the screens of hair. I went too. And then I ran away, and so did you. Fine, call me a coward then. Jack turned to his hunter. He's not a hunter like us. He never got us meat. He isn't a prefect, and we don't know anything about him. He just gives orders and expects people to obey for nothing. All this talk. All this talk. Talk. Who wanted it? You're the one who called this meeting, not me. Jack turned red in the face, his chin sunk back. He glowered up under his eyebrows. All right, then, he said in tones of deep meaning and menace. All right. He held the conch against his chest with one hand and stabbed the air with his index finger. Who here thinks Ralph ought to be chief? Raise your hand. He looked expectantly at the boys as they ranged around. Some had frozen. Under the palms, there was a deadly silence. Come on, hands up, said Jack strongly. Whoever wants Ralph not to be chief, right now, put your hand up. The silence continued, breathless and heavy and full of shame, and slowly the red drained from Jack's cheeks, then came back with a painful rush. He licked his lips and he turned his head at an angle so that his gaze avoided the embarrassment of linking with another's eyes. How many think? His voice trailed off. His hand held out the conch shook. He cleared his throat and spoke loudly. Well, all right then. He laid the conch with great care on the grass at his feet. The humiliating tears were now running from the corner of his eyes. I'm not going to play any longer. Not with you. Most of the boys were looking down now at the grass at their feet, and Jack cleared his throat again. I'm not going to be part of Ralph's lot. He looked around the right-hand logs, numbering the hunters that had been a choir. I'm going off by myself. He can get his own pigs. Anyone who wants to hunt when I do can come now with me. He blundered out of the triangle towards the drop to the white sand. Jack! Jack turned and looked back at Ralph, who was yelling for him. For a moment he paused, then cried out, high-pitched and enraged, No! He leaped down from the platform and ran along the beach, paying no heed to the steady fall of his tears, and until he dived into the forest, Ralph watched him. Piggy was indignant. I've been talking, Ralph, and you just stood there like... Softly looking at Piggy and not seeing him, Ralph spoke to himself. He'll come back. When the sun goes down, he'll be back. He looked at that conch in Piggy's hand. What? Well, there! Piggy gave up an attempt to rebuke Ralph. He polished his glasses again and went back to the subject. We could do without Jack Merridew. There are others besides him on this island. But now we really got a beast. And though I can't hardly believe it, we'll have to stay close to the platform or there'll be less need of him and his hunting. So now we really need to decide on what's what. There's no help, Piggy. Nothing to be done. For a while they sat in depressed silence, and then Simon stood up and took the conch from Piggy, who was so astonished that he remained on his feet. Ralph looked up at Simon. Simon, what's the time? A half sound of jeering ran towards the circle, and Simon shrank from it. I thought there might be something to do, something we could... Again, the pressure of the assembly took his voice away. He sought for help and sympathy and chose Piggy. He turned half towards them, clutching the conch in his brown chest. I think we ought to climb the mountain. The circle shivered with dread, and Simon broke off and turned to Piggy, who was looking at him with an expression of derisive incomprehension. What's the good of climbing up there to where the beast is when Ralph and the others two couldn't do nothing? Simon whispered his answer. What else is there to do? His speech made, he allowed Piggy to lift the conch out of his hands, and then he retired and he sat as far away from the others as possible. Piggy was speaking now with more assurance than with what, if the circumstances had not been so serious, the others would have recognized as pleasure. I said we could all do without a certain person. Now I say we got to decide on what can be done. And I think I could tell you what Ralph's going to say next. The most important thing on the island is the smoke, and you can't have no smoke without no fire. Ralph made a restless movement. No, Piggy, we've got no fire. That thing sits up there. We'll have to stay here. Piggy lifted a conch as though to add power to his next words. We've got no fire on the mountain, but what's wrong with a fire down here? A fire could be built on those rocks, on the sand even. We could make smoke just the same. Yeah, that's right, smoke. Oh yeah, we can make it by the bathing pool. The boys began to babble. Only Piggy could have the intellectual daring to suggest moving the fire from the top of the mountain. So we'll have the fire down here, said Ralph. He looked about them. We can build it here between the bathing pool and the platform. Of course! He broke off, frowning, thinking the things out, unconsciously tugging at the stub of a nail with his teeth. Of course, the smoke's not going to show so much. It's not going to be seen from very far away. But we needn't go near the... The others nodded in perfect comprehension. There would be no need to go near anything where the beastie might be. All right, well, let's build a fire now then. The greatest ideas are always the simplest ideas. Now that there was something to be done, they worked with passion. Piggy was so full of delight in expanding liberty in Jack's departure. He was so full of pride in his contribution to the good of society that he helped to fetch the wood. The wood he fetched was close at hand, a fallen tree on the platform that they did not need for the assembly. Yet to the others, the sanctity of the platform had protected even what was useless there. Then the twins realized that they would have a fire near them as a comfort in the night, and this was a few lit ones dancing and clapping hands. The wood was not so dry as the fuel that they used on the mountain. Much of it was damply rotten and full of insects that scurried. Logs that had to be lifted from the soil with care so that they crumbled into the sodden powder. More than this, in order to avoid going deep into the forest, the boys would work near at hand on any fallen wood, no matter how tangled with new growth. The skirts of the forest and the scar were familiar, and near the conch and the shelters and the sufficiently friendly in daylight. What they might become in darkness, nobody cared to think. They worked, therefore, with great energy and cheerfulness, though as the time crept by, there was a suggestion of panic in the energy and hysteria of their cheerfulness. They built a pyramid of leaves and twigs, branches and logs on the bare sand by the platform. And for the first time on the island, Piggy himself removed one at last, and he knelt down and he focused the sun on the tinder. And soon there was a ceiling of smoke and a bush of yellow flame. The little ones, who had seen few fires since the first catastrophe, became wildly excited. They danced and sang, and there was a partyish air about the gathering. And at last Ralph stopped work and stood up, smudging the sweat from his face with a dirty forearm. We'll have to have a small fire. This one's too big to keep up. Piggy sat down carefully on the sand and began to polish his glass. Well, we could experiment. We could find out how to make a hot small fire and then put green branches on it to make the smoke. Some of the leaves could be better for that than the others. And as the fire died down, so did their excitement. The little ones stopped singing and dancing, and they began to drift away towards the sea of the fruit trees of the shelters. Ralph stopped down in the sand. We'll have to make a new list of who's going to look over the fire. Well, if you can find them. He looked around, and then for the first time he saw how few big ones there were, and he understood why the work had been so hard. Where's Maurice? Piggy wiped his glass again. I expect no. He wouldn't go into the forest by himself, would he? Ralph jumped up, and he ran swiftly around the fire and stood by Piggy, holding up his hair. But we've got to have a list. There's you and me, and there's Samaric, and... He would not look at Piggy, but spoke casually. Where are Bill and Roger? Piggy leaned forward and put a fragment of wood on the fire. I expect they've gone. I expect they won't play either. Ralph sat down and began to poke little holes in the sand. He was surprised to see that no one had a drop of blood by it. He examined his bitten nail closely and watched the little globe of blood that gathered where the quick was gnawed away. Piggy went on, speaking. I see them stealing off when we were gathering wood, and they went that way, the same way as he went himself. Ralph finished his inspection and looked up at the air. The sky, as if in sympathy with the great changes among them, was different today, and so misty that in some places the hot air seemed white. The disk of the sun was dull silver, as though it were near or not so hot, yet the air stifled. They've always been making trouble, haven't they? The voice came near his shoulder and sounded anxious. We can do without him. We'll be happier now, won't we? Ralph sat. The twins came, dragging a great log and grinning in triumph. They dumped the log among the embers so that the sparks flew. We can do all things on our own, can't we? And for a long time, while the log dried and it caught fire and turned red hot, Ralph just sat in the sand and said nothing. He did not see Piggy go to the twins and whisper to them, nor how the three boys went together into the forest. Here you are! He came to himself with a jolt. Piggy and the other two were by him, and they were laden with fruit. "I thought perhaps," said Piggy, "we ought to have a feast, kind of." 3 boys sat down. They had a great mass of fruit with them, all of it properly ripe. They grinned at Ralph as he took some and began to eat. "Thanks," he said. Then with an accent of pleased surprise, "Thanks. Do all right on our own, I tell you we could. It's them that have no common sense. They're the ones that always made the trouble on this island. We'll make a little hot fire." Ralph remembered what had been worrying him. "Where's Simon?" "I don't know." "You don't know, or you don't think he's climbing the mountain again, do you?" Piggy broke into a noisy laughter and took more fruit. "Oh, he might be." He gulped his mouthful. "He cracked." Simon had passed through the area of the fruit trees, but today that little one had been too busy with the fire on the beach, and they had not pursued him there. He went on among the creepers until he reached the great mat that was woven on the open space and crawled inside. Between the screen of leaves and the sunlight pelted, and the butterflies danced in the middle, there was unending dance. He knelt down, and the arrow of the sun fell on him. That other time the air had seemed to vibrate with heat, but now it was threatened. Soon the sweat was running from his long coarse hair. He shifted restlessly, but there was no avoiding of the sun. Presently he was thirsty, and then very thirsty, but he continued to sit. Meanwhile, far off along the beach, Jack was standing before a small group of boys. He was looking brilliantly happy. "Hunting," he said, and he sized them up. Each of them wore the remains of a black cap. Then ages ago they had stood in 2 demure rows, and their voices had been the songs of angels. "We're going to hunt, and I will be your chief." They nodded, and the crisis passed easily. "And then, about that beast." They moved and looked at the forest. "I say this, we aren't going to bother about that beast." He nodded at them. "We're going to forget that beast." "Yeah, that's right. Yes, forget the beast." If Jack was astonished by their fervor, he did not show it. "And another thing, we shan't dream so much down here. This is near the end of the island." They agreed passionately out of the depths of their tormented private lives. "Now listen, we might go later to Castle Rock, but now I'm going to get more of these big ones away from the conch and all that. We'll kill a pig and we're going to have a feast." He paused and he went on more slowly. "And about the beast, when we kill, we're going to leave some of the kill for the beast." That's kind of like a tribute to it. "Then it's not going to bother us if we keep feeding it. Well, at least maybe it won't." He stood up abruptly. "We're going to go into the forest now and we're going to hunt." He turned and trotted away, and after a moment they followed him, obediently. They spread out nervously in the forest. Almost at once Jack found the dung and scattered roots that told of a pig, and soon the track was fresh. Jack signaled the rest of the hunt to be quiet, and he went forward by himself. He was happy, and he wore the damp darkness of the forest like his old clothes. He crept down a slope to the rock-scattered trees by the sea. The pigs lay, bloated bags of fat, sensuously enjoying the shadows under the trees. There was no wind, and they were insuspicious, and the practice had made Jack silent as the shadows. He stole away again and instructed his hidden hunters. Presently, they all began to inch forward, sweating the silence and the heat. Under the trees, an ear flapped idly. A little apart from the rest, sunk in a deep maternal bliss, they laid the largest sow of the lot. She was black, and she was pink, and the great bladder of her belly was fringed with a row of piglets that slept or burrowed and squeaked. 15 yards from the drove, Jack stopped, and his arms straightened, pointed at the sow. He looked around in inquiry to make sure that everyone understood and the other boys all nodded at him. The row of right arms slid back. "Now!" The drove of pigs started up, and at range of only 10 yards, the wooden spears with fire-hardened points flew towards that chosen pig. One piglet, with a demented shriek, rushed into the sea, trailing Roger's spear behind it. The sow gave a grasping squeal and staggered up, and the 2 spears sticking her in the flat rank. The boys shouted and rushed forward. The piglets scattered, and the sow burst the advancing line and went crashing away into the forest. "Go after her!" They raced along the pig track, but the forest was too dark and tangled, so Jack, cursing, stopped him and cast among the trees. Then he said nothing for a time, but breathed fiercely so that they were awed by him, and he looked at each other in an uneasy admiration. Presently he stabbed down at the ground with his finger. There! Before the others could even examine the drop of blood, Jack had served off, judging a trace, touching a bow that gave, and so he followed mysteriously right and assured, and the hunters trod behind him. But he stopped before a covert. Go in there! They surrounded the covert, but the sow got away from the sting of another spear in the flank. The trailing butts hindered her, and the sharp cross-cut points were a torment. She blundered into a tree, forcing a spear into deeper, and any of the hunters could follow her easily by the drops of the vivid blood. The afternoon wore on, hazy and dreadful, with damp heat. The sow staggered her way ahead of them, bleeding and mad, and the hunters followed, wedded to her in lust, excited for the long chase and that dropped blood. They could see her now, nearly got up with her, but she spurted with her last strength and got ahead of them again. Then they were just behind her when she staggered into an open space where bright flowers grew and butterflies danced around each other, and the air was hot and still. Here, struck down by the heat, the sow fell, and the hunters hurled themselves at the pig. This dreadful eruption from an unknown world made her frantic. She squealed, and she bucked in the air, and was full of sweat and noise and blood and terror. Roger ran around the heap, prodding it with its spear whenever pig flesh appeared. Jack was on top of the sow, stabbing downward with his knife. Roger found a lodgment of his point and began to push until he was leaning with all his weight. The spear moved forward inch by inch, and the terrified squealing became a high-pitched scream. Then Jack found the throat of that pig, and the hot blood spouted over his hands as he slit it. The sow collapsed under them, and they were heavy and unfulfilled upon her. The butterflies still danced, preoccupied in the center of the clearing, and at last the immediacy of their kill subsided. The boys drew back, and Jack stood up, holding out his hands. Look! He giggled and flicked blood at them while the boys laughed their freaking palms. Then Jack grabbed Maurice and rubbed this stuff all over his cheeks. Roger began to draw his spear, and the boys noticed it was for the first time. Robert stabilized the thing in a phase and was received uproariously. Yeah, stick it right up her butt! Did you hear? Did you hear what he said? Yeah, he said put it right up her butt! This time Robert and Maurice acted the two parts, and Maurice, acting of the pig's effort to avoid the advancing spear, was so funny that the boys cried with laughter. At length, even this paled. Jack began to clean his bloody hands on the rock, and then he started work on the sow and paunched her, lugging out the hot bags of colored guts, pushing them in the pile of the rock while the others watched him. And he talked as he worked. We're going to take the meat along the beach. I'll go back to the platform, and I'm going to invite everyone for a feast. That'll give us time. Roger spoke. Chief! Huh? How can we make a fire? Jack squatted back and frowned at the pig. We're going to raid them, and we'll just take their fire. There must be 4 of you. Henry and you, Robert and Maurice. We'll put on paint, and we're going to sneak up. Roger can snatch a branch while I say what I want. The rest of you can get this back to where we were. We'll build a fire there. And after that... He paused and stood up, looking at the shadows under the trees. His voice was lower when he spoke again. But we'll leave part of the kill for, the beast. He knelt down again and was busy with his knife, shredding up the pig. The boys crowded around him, and he spoke over his shoulder to Roger. Sharpen a stick at both ends for me. Presently he stood up, holding the dripping sow's head in his hands. Where's that stick? Here! Ram one end into the earth. Oh, it's a rock. Okay, then jam it in the crack. Okay, yeah, good job. Right like that. Yeah, jam it down there. Jack held up the head, and at that moment, he jammed the pig's head as soft as he could into the spear. It pierced through into the mouth. He stood back, and the head just hung there. A little blood was dropping down all over the stick. Instinctively, the boys drew back too, and the forest was very still. They listened, and the loudest noise was the buzzing of flies over all the spilled guts that they just released from the pig. Jack spoke in a whisper. All right, pick up the pig. Maurice and Robert skewered the carcass, lifted the dead weight, and they stood ready. In the silence and standing over the dried blood, they looked suddenly furtive. Jack spoke again loudly. "This head we give to the beast. It will be a gift." The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackened through the teeth. And all at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest and towards that open beach before the beast could come there. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head would still remain like an afterimage. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured Simon that everything was a bad business. "I know that." Simon discovered that he had spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head grinning amusedly at the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignored the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. It seems they're giving a gift to the beast, he thought. Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. "Run away," said the head silently. "Go back to the others. It was a joke, really. Why should you bother with it? You were just wrong, that's all. A little headache, something you ate, perhaps. Go back, child," said the head silently. That's right. Simon was speaking to a head. Simon looked up, feeling the weight of his wet hair, and gazed up at the sky. Up there, for once, were clouds, great bulging towers that spouted away over the island, gray and cream, copper-colored. The clouds were sitting on the land. They squeezed, produced moment by moment the close, tormenting heat. Even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. Simon lowered his head, carefully keeping his eyes shut, then sheltered them with his hand. There were no shadows under the trees, but everywhere a pearly stillness, so that there was real seemed elusive and without definition. The pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. And after a while, these flies found Simon. Gorged, they alighted by his runnels of sweat and drink. They tickled under his nostrils, and they played leapfrog on his thighs. They were black, iridescent green, and without number. And in front of Simon, at that moment, the Lord of the Flies hung on his stick and grinned. At last, Simon gave up, and he looked back, and he saw the white teeth and the dim eyes. He saw the blood, and his gaze was held by the ancient, inescapable recognition. In Simon's right temple, a pulse began to beat on the brain. Ralph and Piggy lay in the sand, gazing at the fire idly, flicking pebbles into its smokeless heart. "That branch is gone." "Where's some, Eric?" "We ought to get some more wood. We're out of green branches." Ralph sighed and he stood up. There were no shadows under the palms of the platform, only the strange light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. High up among the bulging clouds, thunder went off like a gun. "We're going to get buckets of rain here." "What about the fire?" Ralph trotted into the forest and returned with a wide spray of green, which he dumped on the fire. The branches crackled, the leaves curled, and the yellow smoke expanded. Piggy made an aimless little pattern in the sand with his fingers. "Trouble is, we haven't got enough people for a fire. You gotta treat some Americas one turn. They do everything together." "Of course." "Well, that isn't fair, don't you see? They ought to do 2 turns. Ralph considered this, and he understood. He was vexed, too, how little he thought like a grown-up, and sighed again. The island was getting worse and worse. Piggy looked at the fire. "You'll want another green branch soon." Ralph rolled over. "Piggy, what are we going to do?" "Well, we're just going to have to get on without them." "But what about the fire?" He frowned at the black and white mess that lay between the unburned ends of the branches. He tried to formulate, "I'm scared." He saw Piggy look up and blundered on. "Not of the beast. I'm scared of that too, but nobody else understands about the fire. If someone threw you a rope when you were drowning, if a doctor said, 'Take this because it'll save you and it will cause you not to die,' you take it, right?" "Well, of course I would." Can't they see? Can't they understand that without this smoke signal, we're going to die here? Look at this." A wave of heated air trembled among the ashes, but without a trace of smoke. We can't keep one fire going, and they don't care. And what's more, he looked intensely into Piggy's streaming face. What's more is I don't care sometimes. Supposing I got the others not caring, what do you think would become of us if I stopped caring too? Piggy took off his glasses, deeply troubled. I don't know, Ralph. We just gotta go on, that's all. That's what grown-ups would do anyway. Ralph had begun the business of unburdening himself, continued. Piggy, what's wrong? Piggy looked at him in astonishment. Do you mean No, not it. I mean, what makes things always break up the way they do? Piggy rubbed his glasses slowly and thought. When he understood how far Ralph had gone towards accepting him, he flushed pinkly with pride. I don't know, Ralph. I expect it's all him. You mean Jack? Jack, a taboo, was evolving around that word, too. Ralph nodded solemnly. Yes, I suppose it must be Jack. You're right. The forest near them burst into an uproar. Demoniac figures with faces of white and red and green rushed out howling, so that all the little ones fled screaming. Out of the corner of the eyes, Ralph saw Piggy running. Two figures rushed at the fire, and he prepared to defend himself, but they grabbed half-burnt branches and raced along the beach. The three others stood still, watching Ralph, and he saw that the tallest of them, stark naked, save for the paint in his belt, was Jack. Ralph had his breath back and spoke. Well! Jack ignored him. He lifted the spear and he began to shout. Listen, all of you, me and my hunters, we're living along the beach by that flat rock. We hunt, we feast, and we have fun. If you want to join my tribe, you come and see us. Perhaps I'll even let you join, or perhaps not. He paused and he looked around. It was safe from shame or self-consciousness behind the mask of his paint, and he could look at each of them in turn. Ralph was kneeling by the remains of the fire like a sprinter of his mark, and his face was half hidden by hair and smut. Samaric peered together through the palm tree and the edge of the forest. A little one howled, creased and crimson by the bathing pool, and Piggy stood on the platform, the white conch gripped in his hands. Tonight we're having a feast. We just killed a pig and we got the meat. You can come and eat it with us if you like. Up the cloud canyons, the thunder boomed again. Jack and the two anonymous savages with him swayed, looking up, and then recovered. The little ones, though, went on howling, and the others waited for something. He whispered urgently to the others, Go on, now! The two savages murmured, and Jack spoke sharply. Go on! The two savages looked at each other and raised their spears together and spoke in time. The chief has spoken! Then the three of them turned and they trotted away. Presently, Ralph rose to his feet, looking at the place where the savages had vanished. Samara came, talking in an odd whisper. I thought it was. And I was scared. Piggy stood above them all on the platform, still holding the conch. That was Jack and Maurice and Robert, said Ralph. Aren't they having fun now? I thought I was going to have asthma. Oh, that sucks to be your asthma. When I saw Jack, I was sure he was going for the conch. I can't think why. The group of boys looked at the white shell with the affectionate respect. Piggy placed it in Ralph's hand, and the little ones, seeing the familiar symbol, started to come back. Not here. He turned towards the platform, feeling the need for a ritual. First went Ralph, the white conch cradled, then Piggy, very grave, and then the twins, and all the little ones came, and the others. Sit down, all of you. They just raided us for fire. They're having fun, but Ralph was puzzled by the shudder that flickered in his brain. There was something he wanted to say, and then shudder had come down. But They were regarding him gravely, not yet troubled by any doubts about his sufficiency. Ralph pushed the idiot hair out of his eyes and looked at Piggy. But the fire! Of course the fire! He started to laugh, and then he stopped and began to fluent instead. The fire is the most important thing, and without the fire, we can't be rescued. I'd like to put on war paint and be a savage too, but we have to continue burning the fire. The fire is the most important thing on the island because... He paused again, and the silence became full of doubt and wonder. Piggy whispered urgently, Rescue! Oh, yes. Without the fire, we can't be rescued. So we must stay by the fire, and we have to make smoke. When he stopped, no one said anything. And after the million brilliant speeches that had been made on this very spot, Ralph's remarks seemed kind of lame, even to the little ones. At last, Bill held out his hand for the conch. Now, we can't have the fire up there because we can't have fire up there. We need more people to keep it going. Let's go to this feast and tell them that the fire's hard on the rest of us, and the hunting and all that, being savages, I mean. It'll be jolly good fun. We should all join them. Eric took the conch. Yeah, that'll be fun like Bill says, and he's invited us. I say we go. To a feast? Meat? Crackling? Oh, I could do for some meat. Yay, meat! Ralph held up his hand. Why shouldn't we get our own meat, guys? Let's do it for ourselves. The twins looked at each other, and Bill answered. Well, we don't want to go in the jungle. Ralph grimaced. He goes and he survives. Yeah, well, he's a hunter. They're all hunters. That's different. No one spoke for a moment, and then Piggy muttered to Sand. Meat. The little one sat solemnly thinking of meat and dribbling. Overhead, the cannon boomed again, and the dry palm fronds clattered in the sudden gust of hot wind. Page break. You are a silly little boy, said the Lord of the Flies. Just an ignorant, silly little boy. Simon moved his swollen tongue, but said nothing. Don't you agree? Said the Lord of the Flies. Aren't you just a silly little boy? Simon answered him in the same silence. Well then, said the Lord of the Flies, you better run off and play with the others. They think you're batty. You don't want Ralph to think you're batty, do you? Do you like Ralph a lot, don't you? And you like Piggy and Jack? Simon's head was tilted slightly up. His eyes could not break away from the Lord of the Flies as it hung in space before him. What are you doing out here all alone? Aren't you afraid of me? Simon shook. There isn't anyone to help you, only me, and I'm the beast! Simon's mouth labored, brought forth audible words. You're a pig's head on a stick. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, said the head. For a moment or two, the forest and all the dimly appreciated places echoed with a parody of laughter. You knew, didn't you? Because I'm part of you. Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's a no-go. Why things are what they are. The laughter shivered again. Come now. Get back to the others and we'll forget the whole thing. Simon's head wobbled. His eyes were half closed as he thought they were imitating the obscene things of the stick. He knew that one of the times was coming on. The Lord of the Flies was expanding like a balloon. This is ridiculous. You know perfectly well that you'll only meet me down there, so don't try to escape. Simon's body was arched and stiff. The Lord of the Flies spoke in the voice of a schoolmaster. That has gone quite far enough, my poor misguided child. Do you think you know better than I do? There was a pause. I'm warning you, I'm not going to get angry, do you see? You're not wanted, do you understand? We're going to have fun on this island, you and me, do you understand? We're going to have fun on this island, so don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else. Simon found he was looking into a vast mouth, a mouth of a pig. There was a blackness within it, a blackness that spread. Or else, said the Lord of the Flies, we shall do you. See? Jack and Roger and Maurice and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph. Do you? See? Simon was inside the mouth now. He fell down and he lost consciousness. All right, guys. In this chapter, finally, after many chapters of build-up, official divide has happened between Ralph and Jack. Jack with his team, Ralph with his. Meanwhile, Simon, once again, is kind of doing his own thing here, and he stumbles upon the head that they left for a sacrifice for this beast. And it appears, at least now, that suddenly the beast has taken form of this pig head itself. We will see where we get in chapter 9 here, folks. But with that, I hope everybody has a great day, and everybody take care.